I thank the gentleman. The gentlewoman from Missouri, Ms. Wagner, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome back, Secretary Fudge. Madam Secretary, as you know, of course, the President sent a cabinet-wide memo last summer urging agency heads to return agencies to in-person work. The government-wide failure to return to in-office work has hampered critical services and, frankly, wasted taxpayer resources on empty office leases. The GAO has provided data to Congress revealing a shocking disregard for the President's directive, with many agencies utilizing just a fraction of the federal space allotted to their agency. HUD utilized a mere 7% in the 3-month period between January to March 2023. What, ma'am, is your plan to bring HUD back to pre-pandemic levels of in-person work?
Let me just say that I support in-person work.
Well, the President has directed it.
We're about at 44%. When they do these numbers, they take our whole building, bathrooms, hallways, everything. They use that square footage and say, oh, there's just so many people here. But people don't work in bathrooms and hallways or in conference centers. Okay. So the premise by which they come up with the number is actually flawed. We are at about 45%. We are trying to get
45% of the workforce?
Correct.
Boy, that is still very low, Madam Secretary.
I don't disagree with you, but we have contracts that we are still working through, labor contracts and other promises that were made prior to our coming. So we are working within the confines of what we can do with our agreements to get people back to work.
Well, as I said, this is a cabinet-wide memo from the President. Have you spoken to anyone at the White House about some of your constraints, including Chief of Staff Zients, about HUD's progress in returning employees to in-person service?
We talk about it almost every month.
And you're still under 50% of in-person work.
I believe we'll be at 50%.
What difficulties have you faced in getting HUD employees to return to in-person work, ma'am?
Well, the first problem is that many of them were not in-person before the pandemic. That's the number one. They were doing telework. Many of them were teleworking. Secondly, and just as importantly, as a result of the pandemic, there were agreements made with labor unions that we have to comply with. We cannot just go and say, oh, we're going to ignore this agreement. So we are negotiating with the labor unions today to be sure that we can get people back. Secondly, the third thing is that as you look at the people around the country, we have offices in 64 different places. So to make sure that those places also have to come back, because that's a lot of the workforce that we are counting. They don't all work in Washington, D.C. We have people in 64
I understand
offices.
that, and I need to move on. Secretary Fudge, as of March 31st, 2023, HUD had 985 open recommendations from the Inspector General, which, if implemented, could save more than $20 billion. 985 open recommendations, $20 billion. Secretary Fudge, more work must be done between HUD and the OIG to resolve these longstanding issues to improve HUD programs and protect taxpayer dollars. In HUD's latest budget, you in fact requested over $20 billion in new funding. You know, I've raised 3 children, I've run a household, been married for 37 years, and when we ran into an emergency, ma'am, we didn't run to the bank for a loan. We looked at our budget and we tightened our purse strings. We looked to things like what the Inspector General has said and implemented. That's $20 billion. There's your $20 billion right there. Why is HUD asking for new taxpayer money instead of finding that money within its own budget?
The first thing I'd say is that we have dealt with 1,000 OIG recommendations since I came, 1,000 that I inherited. We are doing it every single day.
And you still have 985?
Yeah, there were a lot of them when I got there. So we're working to make sure that we can do everything we can. But the second thing I would say is that I think that as we've had this discussion, the fair discussion is a budget that we had last year. You talk about rising rents. You talk about rising mortgages. How do we pay them if we don't request more resources?
Well, I
Although
tell you
we
what, you've
either
got
have to
resources
say-
right there in your 985 open recommendations. So I'd say look internally. I've used up all my time. I yield back, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
I thank the gentlewoman.